Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Brimo. I'm the founder and group CEO of OpenLearning. This morning, I'm joined by Cherie Diaz, our managing director for Australia, and David Buckingham, director of OpenLearning Limited. So thank you very much for joining me this morning. What I'd like to do sort of in the short time we have together is I'll do a brief run through of the presentation that we announced or we posted on ASX last week on our listing day. And then I'll also, along the way and throughout this process, throughout the presentation, take questions from anyone as well. But I'll try and run through the presentation fairly quickly because I assume that most of you have already gone through it. And then I'm happy to answer any questions about the business, our growth strategy, and the announcement that we put out this morning as well. So maybe just before I begin, Cherie and David, would you like to introduce yourselves briefly to everyone on the call?
Cherie, you go first.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So my name is Cherie Diaz. As Adam said, I'm the Managing Director of Australia, and I look after the end-to-end operations and sales and partnership side of the business as well.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is David Buckingham. I'm over in Perth in Western Australia, where I previously, in my last role, ran Navitas, the listed education business. And Adam contacted me a few months ago when he was thinking of listing OpenLearning and asked me to come on the board, which I was very excited to do, and here I am.
Great. Thanks, Cherie and David. It's great to have you on board as well, David. Really appreciate it. Okay, so as many of you have probably seen, OpenLearning is now one of the largest online education platforms in the region, and we believe it's at the forefront of education delivery. Now, you've seen a few of these stats before. What I probably want to highlight is the key components of the OpenLearning solution and the way in which that's driving some of our growth. So you can see in the sort of short diagram on the right-hand side, OpenLearning enables students to discover courses, it enables them to learn online, and then enables them to showcase their skills. Now, there's a lot that goes into doing that, but really this is the core of the solution that we provide to education providers to enable them to move their either face-to-face or blended or professional development business online. So these education providers see OpenLearning as a way of expanding their business, generating new business, and improving the quality of their offering. Now, since we first started the company in 2012, OpenLearning has expanded both in Australia and across Southeast Asia, particularly starting in Malaysia in 2014, 2015. But for the first sort of 5 years or even a slightly longer of our existence, we focused on building out the technology, developing use cases with university partners and governments, ensuring that the platform delivered on the outcomes that we wanted, and also building our user base to ensure that we have the credibility and the reach to actually attract education providers to our offering. So during that time, prior to listing, we raised about $16.5 million, and we just completed, obviously, our IPO, in which we raised $8 million, which will fully fund our growth strategy for the next couple of years. Now, our user base has grown. We look at this in terms of unique users or unique learners. So we have about 1.7 million unique learners on the platform. And what that means is these are people who are registered, have an account on OpenLearning, and a portion of those, a large portion of those have enrolled in at least one course. So we've generated about 2.5 million enrollments into courses on the platform, which means that on average, students are enrolling in more than one course. At the end of November, just 30th November 2019, our annualized recurring revenue reached almost 900K. This is up significantly from last year by about 95%. And sort of it's a result of the efforts we're making to monetize the core platform itself. We effectively were running a freemium model up until March of this year. And after we stopped that, we've invested heavily and restructured the business to grow our sales and marketing operation. So that revenue is mostly coming from our 60 B2B software as a service customers, which includes a large portion of the Australian universities. So as part of our listing process, we've refreshed our board of directors, and we've got a fantastic board. We've got Kevin Barry, who's the chairman. Some of you may have met him over the years, or even at our listing ceremony last week. Kevin comes with experience across sort of finance and corporate Australia, but also as the chairman of a small cap listed company, ICS Global. David Buckingham, who has joined us on the call this morning, as you heard, was previously the CEO of Navitas and the CEO of IINet. And David has a fantastic understanding of the economics of education, how education businesses are built, and the need to improve quality, and also to implement technology in these kind of businesses. Spiro Papas has also joined us on the board. Spiro is a former senior executive at NAB. He's quite an innovative thinker in the technology space, and he's also the chairman of Splitit. Maya has been on the board with us for about almost 2 years now. Maya joined us originally as an independent director, and she still is. But Maya's main role is she's the, outside of OpenLearning, is she's the vice president for APAC for Twitter, overseeing all their operations from Australia up through Asia and into South Korea and Japan as well. So Maya joins us with a wealth of experience in monetization in emerging markets and a great understanding of doing business across the entire region. And Beverly Oliver is the former Deputy Vice Chancellor of Education at Deakin University in Melbourne. Beverly is probably one of the foremost experts in Australia on micro-credentials and the shift or university shifting into unaccredited education. But Beverly has also driven a lot of change at Deakin University itself in terms of improving the quality of their offering and moving more and more of their programs online. So Deakin is probably one of the leaders in online education in Australia. So I'm really thrilled that I'll be supported by this board of directors going forward. So the problem that we're solving, as many of you are aware, is really increasing access to quality education. So as the world changes, more and more people are looking to upskill throughout their careers rather than just take one university degree after high school and then maybe spend 10 or 20 years in the workforce and then go back for a master's degree. That sort of once in a lifetime education is no longer enough for people to thrive in the workforce. There's now a big shift towards lifelong learning, which means people are looking to upskill throughout their career, looking at courses that may augment their current degrees, or they might be looking at a range of short courses to actually change careers. But this is a problem not just in Australia, where 74% of Australian workers are estimated to be ready to completely retrain to remain employable, but it's also an issue across Southeast Asia and across the world generally, where a large portion of the jobs will be affected by automation. So the Open Learning solution really has 4 key components. One is the core platform itself. So Open Learning is an end-to-end education delivery platform, which means that it enables education providers to do everything from launch what we call a portal, which is like a marketing website for all of their courses, where their courses are listed. Their courses can be packaged into degrees or micro-credentials. Those courses can be sold either through that portal or through openlearning.com. The payments, if the course is unaccredited, can be collected through the Open Learning platform itself. And then the student goes into the course, which is running on Open Learning. And the Open Learning platform, from an education perspective, enables the education provider to deliver a much higher quality learning experience. Now, what we mean by that is that the platform enables much more project-based learning, more activity-based learning, more peer-to-peer collaboration, more social interaction between students and tutors and facilitators. So it really is enabling a style of learning that is necessary for people to develop the problem-solving, teamwork, and critical thinking skills that society needs because of the changes that are happening in the workforce. So the platform has been designed in this sort of way to enable these education providers to run their courses in that style. And it's actually built around an educational philosophy which is backed by about 40 years of academic research. And the general theory that the platform is built around is called social constructivism, which is a fairly academic way of describing sort of a project-based learning collaboration approach. In addition to that, all the work the student does in these courses actually can go into the student's portfolio. So Open Learning automatically generates a portfolio that showcases the learner's skills and credentials to potential employers. That's matched up with our micro-credentials. So every student on Open Learning, depending on which courses they're taking, will likely receive some micro-credential, whether it's a badge or a certificate of completion, or some other way of showing that they've actually completed the course and they've learned something in that process. But really what we see is that the micro-credentials matched with the portfolios are quite powerful for both the education provider, but also for the student themselves. Because a lot of people are now going to a company asking for a job or going through the application process, and they're saying they've studied at UNSW or Harvard or MIT. And when the employer digs into it, they realize they've done a short course, and they can't really tell how short that course was and what the student actually learned. So the purpose of our portfolios and micro-credentials is to enable employers to actually dig into the evidence that the student has generated to receive that credential. So it provides more of an evidence-based approach to seeing if someone's developed the skills that they say they have. Now, all of this is great on its own, but it's even more powerful when it's matched up with our marketplace. So OpenLearning.com is becoming a global marketplace for online education. And what we're seeing is that every month, hundreds of thousands of people are visiting Open Learning, and our existing users are looking at OpenLearning.com to see which courses they should take. Now, obviously, there are many platforms around the world where people discover courses, and this is just one channel. But it is a powerful channel, and we do see that there are education providers in Australia and Malaysia that are working with Open Learning in part to access our user base. And as our user base grows, we expect that to become more and more important. So since we started, Open Learning has become one of the largest online education platforms in the world. We've issued over 800,000 micro-credentials, supporting over 1.7 million students. And the platform has generated over 29 million peer-to-peer interactions between learners. These are either discussions between people, posts that they've made to each other, collaboration points. So it's quite an active community. Now, the challenge with these kind of businesses and platforms is that actually they can be used anywhere in the world. Now, what that means is there's a huge opportunity in many countries, but you really have to focus, particularly in the earlier days of monetization. So what we've done is we've focused on two key markets initially, Australia and Malaysia. Australia and Malaysia, while the countries are small in terms of population, the education sector in each of these countries is very significant. Education, as you all know, in Australia, particularly higher education, is one of the country's largest exports, I think one of the largest service exports. And we see that Australian education and Australian universities and colleges are in many ways leading the way around the world in areas such as micro-credentials, international student recruitment, transforming the quality of the learning experience. So although Australia, population-wise, is fairly small, our higher education system is very robust. There's a large number of providers in the market. So what we look at is really the university and higher education segment, then the vocational education training segment. And there are a couple other segments as well that haven't been included on this slide because they're quite difficult to properly size. But we estimate that there are, looking at sort of IRIS reports and other sources, that there's about an additional 10,000 training providers, professional development organizations, and industry associations in Australia alone that are delivering education. And Open Learning's end-to-end solution, which effectively allows these education providers to build their education business online without having to handle all of the messy integration work between multiple systems that they'd have to do if they were building it on their own. So the alternative to using Open Learning for some of these providers is purchasing a learning management system, which is sort of a more old school learning platform, then setting up a WordPress website, and then setting up maybe an online store, then also setting up a student management system, and then a payment system. So building all of these components themselves, and at the end of the day, then having a pretty subpar learning experience is really the alternative to Open Learning. And that's not good enough for a lot of these education providers because they're trying to compete not just with each other, but with other education providers around the world. So Open Learning solution is sort of a turnkey platform for them to build their online education business. In Malaysia, there's a smaller number of providers in total, only about 670. But beyond that, there's a very large professional development and corporate training sector as well that we think is a good market for us. So initially, we focused on these two markets, but the platform is used all around the world. In fact, our third largest user base for students and also for education providers is actually the US. And we have a number of small US education providers using the platform. And we have a number of quite a few students from the US taking courses on the platform, whether those courses are delivered by institutions in Australia and Malaysia or from those in other regions. We do see the US as actually being quite a strong growth market, but one that will probably end up tapping online. So just breaking down the market a bit further, OpenLearning has really started off targeting the blue chip clients. When we first started the business, we looked at focusing on universities, and to a large extent to this day, we are definitely focused on universities. But we do see the platform now being used by a whole range of other providers, including vocational education providers, corporate and professional development, industry associations to deliver CPD. But the universities are a large part of the market. And we have a very strong position at our existing university clients. And now that we've listed, we've seen that a lot of these universities are quite keen to actually work with us a lot more. And doors have started opening at a number of other institutions around the country because now they actually can get a good look into the business. And we've been around a while and they see that we're a stable platform, that lots of people use us around the world, and that we are actually delivering on what we've been talking about for the past 7 years. So in the university sector, it sort of takes a while to build up that kind of credibility, which is why there are very few players in the space. So since we started monetizing, we've been focusing on recurring revenue, and we've been able to grow our recurring revenue from quite a small base fairly quickly. We've been signing up education providers on usage-based license agreements that have a minimum, sort of a minimum fee attached to them. So most of our plans start at either a few $1,000s a year overseas, or starting at $9,000 or $30,000 a year in Australia, depending on the size of the institution. And that usually comes with a limit on the number of students that are able to utilize the platform from that education provider. So for example, if a university signs up with OpenLearning, they will typically sign up for a minimum of 5,000 students and a minimum fee, which might be around sort of $30,000 a year or more for those 5,000 students. Now, these universities typically have 25 to 50,000 students on campus. And when they build their online education businesses, they're typically looking at, over the long term, getting close to that number online as well. But what we've seen as we've moved from a sort of freemium to a paid model is that we definitely do lose some of those free users along the way. But typically they're the ones that were sort of just kicking the tires. And a few of them, if they like the platform but then still can't afford to pay for it, they typically then have to go through a longer process of procurement at the university. But what we found is that we've been able to pick up a large number of blue chip clients, both in Australia and in Malaysia, since we've started charging for the platform. Because these are the institutions that are not really going to use something for free or not use it properly. So now they know how to work with us since we started charging for a software as a service model. Now, since we ended the freemium model as well, our user base has continued to grow and our number of enrollments has continued to grow. In percentage terms, it doesn't grow as fast as it did when the platform was free, but these are much more quality users in our view. And we still have over 8,000 active courses running across all of our paying clients. And now we can be confident that everyone who's using the platform actually is paying for it in some way, whether the education provider is paying for it or the student is paying for a course. Now it's much easier for us to measure that. And we have the benefit of a large user base, which means we can still market to students in a number of those programs. And we have seen that quite a few education providers, particularly universities in Australia, are continuing to offer free online courses. And even though the course is offered for free to the end students, the university is actually still paying our software as a service fees for each of those students who goes through those courses. So that means that we still are able to grow our user base quite quickly, but we are able to monetize that growth much more effectively. than we were in the past. Now, around the world, there's a whole range of platforms in the higher education sector. We probably look at what we call, or what have typically been called, the massive open online course platforms. And in this set, there's really only a handful in the world that are at this sort of scale. In the US, you have Coursera, Udacity, and edX. edX is technically a not-for-profit, although it charges more than any of the other platforms for education providers. Udacity no longer works with universities. Their focus is on partnering with companies, and they're sort of becoming like an online college almost, where they're offering cybersecurity programming courses, but sort of doing that with their own content. The biggest one is Coursera. Coursera is based in the US. It came out of Stanford. They have about 40 million users and about 200 institutions. But their model is more focused on doing a revenue share with the institution and building out a library of courses that they can then sell into corporates and to the public directly. Now, the challenge they have with that model is that while they're building a library, they have to sign exclusivity deals with a number of institutions. And that means that, if one university in Australia wants to run an MBA program on Coursera, then Coursera probably won't be able to allow the rest of the universities in Australia to run an MBA program on Coursera. So Coursera is becoming more like a TV station rather than a technology platform. And they're taking a large share of the revenue to do that on the assumption that they'll be able to deliver students. But that's probably not always the case. So we see that it's an interesting model. We did test that model out early on as well, but we found that we actually get a lot more, I'd say we have a lot more opportunity in the software as a service model, because institutions are paying upfront based on usage. And institutions, if they have really popular courses that they know they can promote, they don't want to give away a large portion of the revenue to a platform. They believe they can do a lot of it themselves, rightly or wrongly, but it means there's a big opportunity for a platform provider like ours that offers those same services in an unbundled way. But the core education platform of Open Learning is miles ahead of Coursera and also FutureLearn in the UK. So Open Learning, because it takes this project-based learning approach, is able to actually win a lot of support at the universities, because the universities are trying to move into this project-based collaborative learning approach, which is not something that the other platforms really do. So you can see that all of these platforms have begun working with institutions around the world. And in Australia, FutureLearn is probably the strongest out of that set of competitors, but they're also operating on that revenue share model. And they effectively close off their platform to institutions with a certain research ranking. So unless a university is ranked at a certain level, they're typically not able to work with FutureLearn or Coursera. Now that means in the universities, they could be a competitor, but what we've found is that a lot of universities that are using FutureLearn are also starting to use Open Learning. And one of the reasons for that is because they see FutureLearn and Coursera as marketing channels into the UK or the US, whereas they see Open Learning as a platform for delivering their core business or building out what's going to be their core online education business, whether it's short courses or online degrees. So our business model is focused on education providers. It's a usage-based model, as I mentioned, and it's based on the number of learners that are enrolled in courses at the institution using Open Learning. For our enterprises, which are universities, corporate, and government, that pricing is more tailored, but it starts at a multiple of the institution level. So this is sort of at mid-year, so end of June 2019. But you can see we have the 30 November ARR figures on the left-hand side. And what we can see is that our annualized recurring revenue is continuing to grow strongly. And we expect that to continue, obviously well into the future. And you probably saw the announcement that we put out this morning, where we've just signed 13 more education providers onto our usage-based software as a service model. And these are education providers that will start using Open Learning over the next 2 months or so. Typically, we get institutions signing contracts and then have the start date might be a month or two in advance. That happens at the end of the year. But what we've seen is this year we've had quite a strong pickup in that, since it's the first year where we've actually been charging everyone for the platform, because last year there were a number of people who could still log on and use the platform for free. So this means that our sales team is now starting to deliver across all of our markets, so both in Australia and in Malaysia. And what we see is that these education providers that have signed up, there's a lot of capacity to grow usage within them. So this is really part of our growth strategy, where we're signing up institutions that may start off with, let's say, 1,000 students on the platform, but that institution might have 10,000, 20,000, or 30,000 students on campus, with the intention of attracting that many more online and actually marketing those courses to their existing students as well. On top of that, we've been pushing sort of a land and expand strategy, where we sign up an institution. Maybe we typically sign an agreement at the institution level. So the university itself will sign the agreement, and then all the usage by each of the faculties in the university is paid by the university centrally. So once the agreement is signed by the university itself, then our partnerships managers can go out and increase usage across those faculties. We've seen that happen effectively at a number of our Australian and Malaysian universities that have been with us for a few years now. Typically, as soon as the institution sees the types of courses the platform can deliver, then it opens their mind to what's possible at the institution. So, university, for example, might start off running a free taster course to showcase their university to potential students. And then from there, they might start developing short courses that they will charge for. And then after they see that working well, they might develop online degrees or blended learning programs on the platform. And this has already been happening. And you can see that in some of the institutions we've worked with, the number of students has increased significantly. And that's driven an increase of software as a service fees to those institutions. So where we are today with our strategy is we've already hired a few key people. So we've hired so in Australia, for example, our current operations are focused in Sydney. Most of the university partners we have are in Sydney. We've been talking to a number of institutions in Melbourne for quite some time. University of Melbourne is a client of ours, for example, but that's been more fly in, fly out. So we've now hired a partnerships manager dedicated in Melbourne, so that they can focus on that market. And we're planning to do the same in Queensland as well, where we're starting to see a lot of interest from universities and colleges up there, in addition to expanding at our head office in Sydney, but really with a focus on sales and marketing. So our first marketing manager has already started with the business, and we'll be hiring more on the sales side as well. In Malaysia and Southeast Asia, we're seeing a lot of inbound interest from other countries in the region. But the focus is really on increasing our market share in Malaysia, where we're currently the #1 platform in the country for higher education. And our sales team over there, so about 6 on the sales side, about 4 on the marketing side, have already been going across the country, and we've got every institution in the country in our pipeline to some extent. So that's pretty much where we're at. You can see we've got our management team really focused on this, particularly Cherie and Sarveen. Cherie, as she mentioned, leads the Australian operations from a sales, marketing, and services perspective. So we have our learning services team in Sydney as well, which actually works with the universities to redesign their courses, and that's more of a professional service. So Cherie leads that team in addition to the sales and partnerships team and some of the general operations. And Sarveen leads the team in Malaysia from a sales, marketing, and partnerships perspective as well. And what we've seen is that this has been quite effective over the past year, and we've been able to really focus the team on sales and marketing as we've moved from a freemium model to a software as a service model. So that's pretty much it from the presentation, but happy to answer any questions as well if anyone wants to jump in or post them in the Q&A section. Maybe in the meantime, David, do you want to share a bit about sort of your experience with some of the universities and how they're really focused on sort of building new businesses and also looking at the quality of education?
Yeah, sure. Happy to, Adam. So look, I spent several years working with university partners at Navitas, admittedly providing a very different service, mainly the provision of international students, but we also had many conversations with our partners about the world they were operating within, and we also had our own private education, higher education businesses as well, mostly in Australia, but a few in other places around the world. And sort of the way I describe where they sit from a technology perspective is early days. I think the whole sector is going through a massive upheaval and set for quite probably the biggest period of change, certainly the university sector anyway, the biggest period of change they've ever faced in the next 5 to 10, 15 years. As they embrace technology and you know, the sort of forces of the new student, as I call it, which are very different to the model most universities have operated within for the last 100 years, which is a heavy face-to-face teaching approach. So I could see universities grappling with this difficult move, sitting on large property infrastructure investments, and yet not being able to sort of utilise those as much anymore, and needing to embrace technology. I would say one other thing. Adam mentioned quality. That my experience with all of the partners that I dealt with at Navitas was very singular and fundamentally the same in that respect. Universities are very, very focused on the quality of their teaching and the quality of their education process and support, and doing business with any of them required you to be a carer of their brand and a carer of their quality. And so, what I like about open learning personally is that attracted me straight away. That it's built by people with a passion for education and a passion for pedagogy, and a keenness to do that in a high quality way. And the platform has got many aspects to it which provide, albeit online and very different, its partners with an ability to deliver digitally with quality. So back to that change, you know, the fundamental change that's happening for most partners most universities is the move to digital. It's an efficient way to deliver. It's now proven across the world that you know, student outcomes can be successful. Student outcomes can be as well. It took a while, but it's there now, that the recognition that student outcomes can be delivered as well, with a mix of digital and face-to-face delivery of the teaching. And many universities, and I experienced a number through Navitas, I've started embracing the move now and are using it proactively. They're extending their brand globally through digital. They're giving their teaching faculties and teaching teachers the opportunity to use digital more and more in the classroom with their students. The platform at Open Learning is very interactive in that respect. It provides lecturers and teachers with the opportunity to do lots of different things electronically that were never available on the first LMS platforms that came out 10, 15 years ago. And then the final
questions coming in here as well. So,
sorry, I'll just wrap up, Adam. The final thing I was going to mention was that it's pretty clear now, and there's lots of research been done, but it's pretty clear now that the workplace the rate of change in the modern workplace is going to dramatically increase. And the idea of going to university once in your life for 3 or 4 years to learn everything you need to know for a 50-year career is pretty much bunkum. And universities are starting to realise that and starting to embrace the need to hold on to its students for a lot longer period and be lifelong teachers to them. And so the idea of, if you believe that, then the need clearly is to then introduce short-term or short form courses and much more sort of periodical lifelong learning exercises. And this platform is perfect for that. And you'll see that that's where it's getting used first by the clients it's already got. Adam, I'll shut up there and hand back to you.
No, it's good, because on that topic, we've got a few questions here. So one of them is asking the typical length of the sales cycle, and are universities coming to market as part of a university-wide review of IT? Now, the sales cycle varies, and I might let Cherie share a bit about that. But so far for universities, it's been anywhere from 6 months to 2 years or longer for a university to actually make the switch or start using the platform to build out a business. Now, typically, we've been engaging with these universities for quite some time. So, in Australia, there's only about 40 to 43 universities, depending how you count. And, we have 9 of them we currently work with. There's at least that many that we've been engaging with for quite some time. So the first conversation is usually, for a while back. And we'd often see that these universities have been following us for many years before then. Now, for other education providers, so private higher education providers, vocational colleges, it's much faster than that. It's weeks, sometimes just a few months. But it's typically not driven by a review of IT. The decisions for open learning are typically made by the education and academic side of the university and the business side of the university. So it's usually a strategic review of the university's priorities and its revenue streams. So a university, for example, looking to increase revenue will typically look towards building out a short course program or building out online degrees. And that decision gets made more at sort of the deputy vice chancellor, pro vice chancellor's level. And it's a business decision. And then the deputy vice chancellor, academic or education, will come in, look at it from an education perspective. So we typically don't deal much at all with the IT side of the university. They don't need the IT department to do much from open learning, because it's quite a turnkey solution. It's all there's not much work for them to do. So it's really on the integration side. If they want to integrate it with other parts of the university, then they might get IT involved. But that's typically one of the final things that they look to tick off. Cherie, did you want to add anything on the sort of private higher ed side as well, and sort of how quickly those conversations move along?
Yeah, sure. So as Adam already said, the university process tends to be a little bit longer just because the procurement cycle is longer. But the private higher education provider sales cycle can be much quicker. As Adam already alluded, sometimes it's anywhere between 6 weeks to 3 or 4 months. And normally they're quicker to get up to speed and have their courses out in the market as well. I'll probably just add to that each university varies slightly as to whether it's an enterprise-wide approach in their license agreements, or they leave it up to particular schools or faculty. So we tailor our approach and our sales cycle to meet their strategy as well.
Oh, thanks, Cherie. I've got a few more questions here as well. So this one, can you please explain the options/shares to be issued to the Malaysian investors? Does this have anything to do with the substantial shareholder notifications to the market? So 2 of our substantial shareholders are Malaysian public listed companies. They invested in the company about just over 2 years ago. And they actually invested at a much higher price than the IPO. I think their entry price was probably around actually 35 cents or so. Now, they're generally long-term holders. However, one of them, as a public listed company in Malaysia, had run into some cash flow challenges. And therefore, we arranged to sell about 30% of their shares prior to listing, just the same time. Now, the rest of their shares are escrowed for 6 months, so the remaining 70%. So that's one of the Malaysian substantial holders. The other substantial holder, Paramount Corporation, they have that same entry price, and they're a long-term holder. They actually are the original owners of a chain of universities and colleges in Malaysia. So they're in the property education business. But yes, that's where the substantial holder notifications have come from. So next question, you mentioned that some of the clients are non-paying. What portion of customers are currently non-paying, and do you expect all of them to convert into paying customers? If so, what would the ARR annualize at? So when we went through the process of effectively putting up a paywall in March this year, what we did is we reached out to all of the institutions that were seriously and actively using the platform. And we worked through with them whether they would actually, whether there was potential that they could sign up and pay for it. Now, some of those institutions, we worked out they could, or that they might be able to, but they would need to go through a procurement process at their institution. So we supported them through that. But for all of those, we no longer let them use the platform unless they're paying for it. So there aren't any more clients that are sort of non-paying, so to speak. So all of the B2B SaaS customers are paying on a SaaS agreement. Outside of that, there are a handful that are on revenue share arrangements, which is another question, which is asking about what the nature of the service and marketplace revenue is. Are you taking a clip of course fees? So there's a number of legacy agreements that we have where we are taking a percentage of those course fees. And that shows up in our marketplace revenue, where we are actually getting a chunk of the sales from those courses in lieu of software as a service fees. Now, that is something that we are working to adjust over time. So some of these providers will eventually move to a software as a service agreement because that's really the focus of what we're doing, and it's less seasonal than taking a percentage of course fees. But there are no longer any sort of clients that are using OpenLearning and not paying either of those. Now, the conversion rate, in the it's actually listed in the prospectus. There were a few hundred education providers that we considered as actively using the platform, and we've been working through with some of those to convert them. And then there's a number of what we consider independent educators. So these are individuals who've been building courses, and they were building those courses for free previously on the platform. Now we charge them under a much lower cost independent educator model, where they pay about $200 a year to use the platform. That's increasing to $600 a year next year for new independent educators. And on that model, there's about 400 small independent educators that are paying on that model. So we tried to grandfather as many of them in as possible, but we've been focusing on moving some of those institutions across to our SaaS agreements. So just back to this nature of services and marketplace revenue. So services revenue is from what we call learning services, which is a combination of learning. It's really learning design, and learning design is where a learning designer who is someone with an education background and experience with online education, they actually go into the university or the college or the corporate, and they sit down with the subject matter expert and redesign their course so it's more project-based, collaborative, and can be delivered effectively online. So for example, University of Newcastle came to us and wanted to build a cybersecurity graduate certificate. Now that's a four university course program. The university itself didn't quite have the resources to do it on their own, and they wanted to work with our team to see how it could be done and to make sure that the program was delivered on time and on budget. So our learning designers went in, they worked with the subject matter experts at the university, and they built out those courses together. So one of those courses started off as 500 PowerPoint slides, and then eventually it was turned into a project-based collaborative online learning experience on OpenLearning. So that services revenue is something we charge on a daily basis. So we charge out our learning designers previously about $1,100 a day. That's now increased to I think about $1,200 to $1,300 a day. And what we see is we go in and we scope out the project and we build it with the institution. We don't do that for all courses because most institutions wouldn't be able to afford that for every course they build. So we also focus on upskilling the educators or lecturers at the university or the university's own learning design team so that they can do it on their own. And we focus on software as a service fees. Okay, so any other questions? Happy to answer anything else while I'm here. Okay, we've had someone raise their hand. Hello, Mike.
Adam, while you're playing with that, I just wondered whether it'd be worth you mentioning the targets that are set in the board has set you for the next couple of years, just to give the shareholders a sense of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, definitely. So okay. So there's a question. So when will you hit profit break even? And next question is, how important is reaching profitability versus entering new markets and reinvesting back into the platform? Now, I think these are quite important questions. What we've set out to do is under our current strategy to operationally break even with between sort of $4 to $5 million of revenue. And that's something we would expect to do in the next 12 to 18 months. Now, the question about how important that is versus entering new markets, I think that's a decision that the board will have to make over the coming months and quarters. And what we see is that there's significant opportunity for us in a range of markets. So at the moment, our sales and marketing operation is largely focused on Australia and Malaysia, but we're receiving inbound interest from Indonesia, Vietnam. We have clients in Singapore, clients in the US, UK, Canada. So we do see that what we've built is actually globally, it serves a global need. And there are people willing to pay for it all around the world. Now, because of that, the board could look at whether, the company decides to invest more in particular markets where it looks like the opportunity is clear. But we do have to be careful, in my view, not to try and go to too many markets at the same time. So what our focus is on is really making sure that we have a really strong position in the Australian market and then in Southeast Asia. Because if we can build a really strong position in Australia with half the universities in the country, it's a very strong client base, a lot of, in addition to that, having some government customers, industry associations, then we have a commanding position as the #1 provider to institutions in what's one of the world's top education markets. So that's very valuable. And that's really what we want to focus on in the near term. But there are opportunities on whether, on sort of these other markets. And I think the other way that we are looking at it is we do see that the number of education providers that will sign up online for the platform itself. So at the moment, all of these B2B SaaS customers are coming through our sales and partnerships team. Whereas next year we'll be able to onboard a lot of them online through the website, and that will contribute to growth in other markets. The platform itself, we are continuing to invest in. We don't expect to increase our investment in the platform substantially beyond where it is now, because we have been building it out for a number of years, and we have quite a strong development team. So we're quite pleased with the pace that that's going, but there will be opportunities in our view to invest in some new areas around the platform over the years to come, particularly around optimizing the experience for education providers in terms of things such as learning analytics, using artificial intelligence to improve the facilitation process, improve the efficiency of the assessment process. So these are all things that we've looked at. Next question I have is, will the presentation be available for later reference? Yes, this presentation is already on ASX, and it was posted on listing day. So you're welcome to download it there. Another question, how is OpenLearning competing with online course providers like Udemy? So Udemy is really, I'd say it's a site that lets you post videos and put up a paywall. So that most people charge about $10 for a course on Udemy. and sort of a race to the bottom. From a student's perspective, it's possible for a student to buy courses from lots of different platforms around the world. The student could go to OpenLearning, they could go to Udemy, they could go to Coursera, and there's different courses in all of these. What we've seen is that what differentiates OpenLearning is the quality of the courses themselves, which is usually only apparent after a student starts taking a course, unfortunately, because then they see that project-based learning experience. So prior to that, we rely on the way in which the course is presented, the brand of the university, the micro-credentials, the issues, things like the portfolios. But we've seen that people are now a bit more discerning. You know, a lot of people may sign up for a $10 cybersecurity course on Udemy, for example, but a large number also paid for the $150 cybersecurity course we run in Singapore with Temasek Polytechnic, and many people have paid for the $13,000 graduate certificate in cybersecurity we run with University of Newcastle. So I think the market is becoming a bit more discerning. So it's no longer a race to the bottom as it once was. Another question here. So are there any acquisitions in the pipeline over the next 3 to 6 months?
Just jump in there.
Yep. So Cherie, I think your connection is not very good.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was just going to jump in just on the comments you're making about Udemy and the other providers. One of the things that actually stands out for us is we've got a quality assurance process for courses to be listed in our marketplace, which for our education institution partners is a positive for them because they know that the effort they put into building quality courses is going to be recognised in the marketplace, but also for our learners that they have that trust factor in the courses that they're joining and paying for through the platform are of the quality that we talk about in our sales and marketing collateral and the way the platform's being designed as well.
Yeah, definitely. The next question I have is, are there any acquisitions in the pipeline over the next 3 to 6 months? Revenue projections for FY20. Are we still on track for ARR of 4 million? So the board will be looking at sort of the strategy that for next year, but that's not something that we have many thoughts on at the moment. Revenue projections for 2020, we haven't included revenue projections in our prospectus, but we do have performance rights for myself, for David and the key management team for getting to that 4 million ARR number by the end of 2020. So that's really what we're focused on, and you can see announcements like we put out this morning where we're getting a large number of clients coming on board on these usage-based agreements. Next question is, will the webinar recording be available? Yes, it's been recording. So I don't think there'll be any issues with posting that up later as well. Great. So are there any other final questions? Okay, well, if there's nothing further, thank you everyone so much for attending this morning. As mentioned, the recording of this should be made available. This presentation was posted on ASX last Thursday, so you're welcome to download it there. And you're also welcome to reach out if you have any questions as well. If there are any education providers that you're associated with, feel free to actually make an introduction to us. If they're not in our pipeline, then we'd be very happy to talk to them as well. So I really appreciate everyone's support. And thank you so much for your time this morning. Okay, all the best, everyone.